I can give you a little background on me. I'm retired several years. I was a professor at RIT for 57 years and teaching graphic design. My background was in art and then in design, both as a student and as a professional, and then as an educator. My education was a bachelor's degree from RIT and a master's degree from University of Wisconsin. During my time at Wisconsin, I became interested in education as a career rather than practice as a career, and so my career has unfolded in that direction. So for many years, I was teaching studio classes in graphic design. And then in 1983, we did a conference here at RIT. Another colleague and I set up a conference here on history of design and history of graphic design. And this was really the first time that any national conference had been held on this topic. And so it was a wonderful opportunity to have all kinds of great designers and teachers and scholars come to our campus. And it really opened up for many, I think, the whole field of studying the history of design and the importance of that. And I always say to my students that it's important to know about the history of your field, whatever your field is. If you're serious about being a professional in your field, then you need to know about the history of that field. And so I think for those of you that are, as I understand it, majoring in information design there at Northeastern, I would hope that you would know about something about the history of designers that have focused on what we call information design. Let me have a show of hands. How many of you have ever heard of Richard Saul Wurman? Okay, that how many is okay.
Did positive.
Did.
Okay, well that's a good sign for me. It's a good sign for me to know that you're tuned in to some kind of background about your history. How about Harry Beck?
Henry Beck.
Okay. Who was Harry Beck?
Who was
Engineer.
Who
Did
maps for the tube?
Engineer, and he did maps for the tube.
Maps for the London Underground, right?
Yes.
Okay, we got that. Just checking. So this is a really good sign here that you folks are getting some good information in terms of your program. Now, Sheila and I have worked 8 years, actually. I think it was, wasn't it, Sheila? 8 years on this book on Will Burtin. But let's go back to my career a little bit more. So we had this conference in 1983, and that kind of opened me up to the possibility of becoming more of a design historian to fill the void of information about history of graphic design. And so we started by bringing archives to my school, and in order to have a source for serious research and scholarly study. And so I started with Lester Beall, and then that was the first archive that came in the late 1980s, and then we kept adding archives of designers, mostly the modernist American designers. This would be designers of the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And then the archive then started to grow, and we now have 45 collections. We have all the American modernist designers in our collections here. So it's a fantastic resource for me and for our students. So my career kind of changed then in terms of just teaching studio design. Then I started to teach history of graphic design courses, and I developed many of them actually, survey courses and then very specific courses. And my work in design history and in my teaching actually led me to a number of other projects. In 1989, my first book came out, and I did a book called 9 Pioneers in American Graphic Design, and then another book on Lester Beall, another book called American Modernism, and the most important book to you folks would be the book that I co-authored with Sheila. And this was focused on the designer Will Burtin, who we both felt was a very important design pioneer in so many ways. And so I assume that all of you know Will Burtin and know him well in terms of his great career accomplishments. I think there have been many graphic design professionals who have just naturally oriented themselves to teaching or to practicing graphic design in an information design way, and those are the ones that we really need to look carefully at in terms of your program. Lester Beall, or excuse me, Will Burtin, we have his archive here. It's one of our largest archives. He was a German designer, very well known in Germany, and then emigrated to the United States in the late 1930s, just ahead of World War II. And because he was well known in Europe before he came, well known in Germany particularly, he fit in very well in New York and he had a really fantastic career with, but he was always a very science-oriented designer. And that brings a certain kind of structure and discipline to all of his work, in a way that makes it fitting to talk about it in an information design context. Then, in terms of my own evolution, I'm sure how many of you are familiar with Massimo Vignelli? Okay, well that's good. Not good actually, because you all should know him. But let's talk about him. Massimo Vignelli was an Italian studied architecture. He and his wife Lola, they eventually came to the United States, and he was really a leading modernist graphic designer for many years. He died about 5 years ago. He was my good friend, personal friend, and he was very respectful of the work we have been doing at RIT and design history. And he, since we had many archives here, he decided in consultation with me that he wanted to have their archive here at RIT. So that was a big opportunity for us. We came, so this was an opportunity for us to bring the artifacts of his career here at RIT, which we did, but the collection was too large to go in the library with our other collections, so we had to build a whole building for it. So here at RIT now we have a building called the Vignelli Center for Design Studies, and in that building is the Vignelli collection and other collections too, by the way. And I was the director of that center for 10 years and up until my time of retirement. The center is still going strong with a new director, industrial designer named Josh Owen. And I'm still involved weekly in the planning and implementation of the center. But you should go online when you get a chance and look up the Vignelli Canon, C-A-N-O-N, and that will give you an opportunity to find out a good deal about Vignelli's work, and I think you'll be impressed with how much of it really does focus on the clear transfer of information. So that, I think, other than the wonderful 8 years that I spent with Sheila working on the Will Burtin book, we had started out with that book with a hope of a British publisher, and worked in that direction for several years, only to find out that the publisher really was not seeing the project the way we were. And so the project ended with them, and then was, I think, static for a while. And then we hooked up with the press here at RIT and completed the book. And I'm sure you've seen the book. And I think Sheila and I are both very proud of that accomplishment. And it was really fortuitous that we had Burtin's archive here, because I had access to all of his work, and so we could use it for our research and for our illustrations in the book. So that's, I think, a bit of a summary of me, Sheila. What else can we talk about?
That's great. I don't know if so far there are questions, otherwise I'm going to ask a couple of things. Anne, yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about how you got Will Burtin's work to RIT? I might have missed that.
Well, that's a good story. Okay. Well, Will Burtin was, of course, I had known of him. I had met him once, and of course he was on my list of archives to get anyway. But he was married to another very important designer. You should know about. Her name was C.P. Pinellas. Does anybody know C.P. Pinellas? Okay, now there's another one for you to look up. She was a magazine art director, and among other things, she was a very innovative. She was really the singular one woman in the graphic design field in the 1930s and 40s. But she and a couple colleagues developed 17 magazine, which was very innovative in terms of women. About books, about magazine for teenagers, the teenage market. Well, anyway, C.P. Pinellas was my friend too, and I had many times interviewed her and done research with her. And she was married to Will Burtin. Actually, she was Burtin's second wife. His first wife had passed away, and the Burtins had good friends who were the Goldens. And so, as happens sometimes, Will Burtin married Bill Golden's widow. And so CP ended up with all the archives of both Burtin and Bill Golden. And then she had her own, of course. And so I was friends with CP and with her daughter, Carol, who's still alive. So we, when CP wanted the archives to go to New York someplace because they felt that all the work was done in New York and it should be there, but there was no place in New York that wanted it or could take it. And so it kind of sat that way. Then when CP died, working with her daughter, it came to RIT. And it was a huge truckload of work, as you go to 3 archives, but it really filled out our collection at that point. So what am I talking about here? So that's how the Burtin collection came to RIT. as I said before, it's a large collection with, because he was one of these designers that just saves everything, which is archivist's dream. And so we had a lot of really wonderful stuff to work with. And I think it's important for all of you to know about these kinds of people, and to study their work carefully, because they're out there. They've been out there practicing what you're getting ready for, and so you can learn a lot from seeing their successes and failures. Let's talk a little bit about Richard Saul Werman. Now, he's still alive, and he's my friend also.
Roger,
Yeah.
we have a question here.
Okay, go ahead.
How do you define unique, or like how do you decide who a unique or impactful designer is compared to someone who's just been doing design their whole life but doesn't really leave an impact?
That's a really good question. That goes to the heart of what you guys are all about. So what I would say that for your focus and your specialization, you need to be the experts in how form and content gets brought together to make clear and coherent messages for the user or the reader. That's about the best definition I could make without getting into more detail in history. Does that help?
I don't know if you have a follow-up. I think he was trying to understand a little bit more. So there are many information designers or designers, and some of them become more well-known or more unique, and others end up being less known. So how would you differentiate one from the other, or why some become more famous than others? Do you have a thought on that?
Well, I would think that in most cases the work itself is what makes the difference, and that the way that the information designer treats and shapes the relationship of form and content on behalf of a given idea or client or project is really, in my view, what it's all about.
Thank you.
Yeah, Lindsay, go ahead.
So how do you distinguish between what is considered information design and what is considered graphic design, or what's your view on the relationship between those two fields?
That's a really good question. I think, at least in my view, now I could be, again, it's one person's opinion, but in my view, graphic design is more of an umbrella term, and there can be a number of subsets of graphic design that could include, nowadays, it could include things like entertainment graphics. It could include time-based work. It could include advertising. And I think that for my point of view, information design is one of the most important subsets of graphic design. And I always try to urge my students in the past to look very carefully at that as a career option, because it's a very important one in terms of the needs of our society and of business and so forth. That help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks for the feedback. So what's
So
next?
one more question, Roger. You're becoming very famous.
So the name of this talk is Rhetoric, the use of figurative language structures for contemporary visual communications. So I wonder how you see the role of rhetoric in information design and how that relates to communicating information ethically, but with an impact.
Oh, you're talking about ethics, designing information design in ethical situations. Is that kind of part of your question, or?
I think she's trying to understand what's the connection between rhetoric, information design, and ethics.
Okay. Well, my intended talk today was about visual rhetoric. And visual rhetoric is one, it's one, because I'm interested and I've been very interested in design theory. And I think you should be interested in design theory too. Because in many cases, design theory enhances and is related to design practice. I think design theory is just one area, like many, that can add a great deal to your intellectual depth and curiosity. Visual rhetoric was in the past, in the years gone by, particularly like in the 1800s and so forth, if you were in college or in a good school, a private school, you would study rhetoric, and it would be somehow tied to your study of the English language. But rhetoric has been for many years a form of a structure which can help the user in terms of establishing a series of critical figures, we call them rhetorical figures. Now, I know you all know about what, I'm sure you know what oxymoron is, right? You know what an oxymoron is? So oxymoron is one rhetorical figure, okay? And my talk today was going to be about the theory of visual rhetoric, and to take you through a series of images that I took off Facebook, which exemplify different rhetorical figures. Some of you also might know of the word simile. Simile is another rhetorical figure. And there are many of them, and some of them are quite old-fashioned, actually, in title. The word symbol is also one. I'm looking at my list here. Pun is also another one. Okay, so my intent today was to take you through a series of rhetorical figures through different illustrations that I had taken from Facebook. So, and the important thing to remember about visual rhetoric as a theory, and it's just one of what could be what is a whole array of theories that I think you should be aware of. Another theory area is Gestalt perceptual psychology. But getting back to rhetoric, by understanding rhetoric and these different kinds of terms, you as a designer can be much more critical in your view of what you see and what you create. You can be critical in terms of how you perceive it and how you talk about it, but then you can also use rhetorical figures and topics to generate ideas for problems that you're solving if it's appropriate. And that's the key thing. It's both critical and it's generative. And that's the important thing about design theories, is that ideally they should help you in both ways, both in your critical assessments and in your ability to then turn that around in terms of using them for solving problems when appropriate.
Thank
With
you.
this background, Sheila, I could send you, if I can figure out how to do it, we can send you the slideshow and then you could show it. And I think it would make a lot more sense than what I'm talking about. But
yes, I think everyone would love to see the images, so we can work on that later. And I'm sure we're going to find a way to get those images this way.
is there any? Do we have a little more time?
I think we can have like 5 minutes, and then the students also have class afterwards. And I don't know if.
Okay, I just wanted to talk about Richard Saul Werman, a good friend and a really interesting individual, somebody you need to know about, and you need to know his books and you need to read them. And he's become kind of the guru of information design, but he doesn't use that language. He calls it information architecture, and he's really all about designing for people in order to make them understand better. His last book was called Understanding Understanding. And so if you're looking around for contemporary models of people who have done interesting things. Now, Werman in his career has done so many interesting things which really are examples of his interest in information design or information architecture. He's done, these conferences. He started the TED conferences. We've been working with him to try, and with RIT, to try to have a Werman Design Center here at our school, but it's a complicated process, and I don't think it's going to succeed as the one with Vignelli did. But nevertheless, the opportunity is still out there, and so he is one person I think you all should be familiar with.
I think we've been talking about him a little bit in class, so the students, that name sounds, I imagine, rings a bell to many of the students, which is a good thing.
So is there anything else I could say in the last few minutes here? Question?
Any concerns, comments, questions about the amazing thing to me? Go ahead.
I have a question about the archives. Are those like living archives, or is there anybody working on the archive, curating the collection and adding new things, new cases if you find? So how do you make them also sustainable?
Well, the point usually is, the way it usually works is that you have a famous designer, and at some point they pass away, and their family needs to deal with all the artifacts of their career. And it's a real problem for people to have to deal with this. And of course, in the case of the designers that I've been interested in collecting, we've been a big help, because we show up with a big truck and students and take everything away, every piece of paper. But then when it comes to the school, it's very raw form. And so we have to have a special archivist catalog everything so that we know what we have and organize it and box it appropriately in acid-free folders and boxes and label it properly. And then most importantly, make a finding guide for it, which is like a notebook that tells where everything is in every box. And once you have all that, then you have a wonderful resource that can be functional and used by researchers and students and anybody really as a way of getting at these precious artifacts.
Are students using the archive, Roger, as part of the courses? How is the archive being used these days?
Well, it's being used by teachers and students. In some cases, students will do a thesis or a project that'll require in-depth research using archive materials. There are people from outside that come in, writers and scholars that use the collection too. In some cases, it's as simple as the teachers taking the undergrad students over there and showing them a whole array of posters of Jacqueline Casey's work. In other cases, they might, in an information design class, they might go over and look more carefully at some of Burtin's work. So the point is that about our archives are that they're being used and they're not just stuffed away in a closet like many archives are. And that's the prime reason that designers and their families want to give the work to RIT is because they know it'll be used. Does that help that answer your question about archives a bit?
Yeah, it does.
How do you sustain, you asked about sustaining it, so back to funds or raising money for continuation of the center. I know you had the money from Massimo's archives, but what about everybody else?
About what?
All the other collections are growing your collections.
So the other collections are all housed in our library, and we've never paid for any collections. They've all been donated. We have a staff of archivists and specialists who work with archives that maintain this. There is, as you might suspect, there is a aspect of library science that deals with training people to be archivists, and we have those folks around, so it's a tremendous asset to our school. And so we have the two areas. One is the Vignelli collection, and then there's some other collections there, and then the other part is the main it's called the Cary, C-A-R-Y, Graphic Design Archive, which is in our library.
Thanks, Roger.
Okay.
Is there an area where it's exhibited, like the collection? Okay. Is there a space at RIT that the collection is regularly exhibited and kind of like curated to show to the general public?
Yes, we do. We have several large. Well, in the refurbished library area, there is a nice exhibit area now, but there's a major exhibit space in the art school where we do have major shows. Sometimes it's work from the collection, sometimes it's work from outside. One of the we just have a new collection that's been announced. Bruno Manguzzi. That's another name you need to know. He's a fantastic graphic designer from Switzerland. Bruno Manguzzi, Monguzzi. So we're still adding collections to the Cary Graphic Design Archive.
I didn't know Bruno, Roger.
Pardon?
I don't know who Bruno was.
Well, now you do.
Yes, that's homework for me.
Wonderful, wonderful poster designer.
Ah.
And we've had an exhibit of his work even before he donated his archive. We had an exhibit in his work in the school at the University Gallery.
Okay. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'm also really interested to know, over the course of your career, how have you observed design has changed, and how do you think it will continue to change, in the future with all this integration of technology and AI? But
well, I must admit that I don't know much about AI. But of course, the big, you know, for many years up till the computer arrived, the graphic design was done by hand, if you can believe it. You know, if you have a number one X-Acto knife, you know, you'll understand this. But then when the computer came along and it started to be designed in such a way that it can deal with typography and so forth, the whole field changed. And but I still maintain, and again, I may be old-fashioned in this way, but I still maintain that the formal visual, the basic formal visual values that are important in terms of form and content in designing messages is still valid, whether it's the computer or whether it's by hand or whether it's done some other way. And there needs to be, there must be this kind of formal structure involved. So I'm not one for an overabundance of intuitive graphics. I'm much more of a structuralist and a modernist, and one who believes in things like grids. Okay, grid, you know, that's the most famous four-letter word for graphic designers. But all of this in structure is very important. So, excuse me, phone's ringing here. That's that, okay. I'm really sorry we couldn't get the Rhetoric program up for you guys, because I was really looking forward to it. But maybe this will all be an entree for it, and then when you get it, you'll still feel like you get the information.
Next time you have to come in person, Roger. Yeah.
Oh, that would be even better. Yes, then we could really have some time to talk. But I really enjoy the questions. I really enjoy seeing you folks, and I hope maybe that we can meet at some point. My daughter lives in Boston, so we do get there occasionally.
We will organize something for the next semester or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Roger.
Good luck to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.